who also have francophone minorities outside Quebec in their ridings because official languages must be respected here in this country.
Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Miramichi, Grand Lake.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to send greetings to the good people of my riding of Miramichi, Grand Lake. Monsieur le Président, c'est depuis
Mr. Speaker, since our country began, the Mi'kmaq in my riding have shared their territory with the new arrivals from Scotland, Ireland, and elsewhere.
Thank the Western provinces, particularly Alberta, for providing good work for our men and women as our local economy was struggling. My goal, however, Mr. Speaker, is to bring back economic prosperity to my region. As a historical trade gateway to Europe and the rest of the world, I trust that the final touch on the European trade agreement will happen soon so our region can take advantage of this tremendous opportunity. Finalement, Monsieur le Président.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the people of my riding for having put their trust in me. And on my behalf, on the behalf of my wife, Lise, I wish them a good year.
The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As this is my first opportunity, I would like to congratulate and welcome all members into this place. I cannot say your names, but obviously you know who you all are. This weekend, I returned from my amazing riding of Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola. And over the weekend, I heard a fair bit of concern over the last Friday's throne speech. In my experience, it's unusual to hear concerns over a throne speech. Many citizens were concerned that the government's upcoming priorities made no mention on a softwood lumber agreement. Mr. Speaker, communities such as Princeton, Merritt, and West Kelowna, forestry is the single largest employer. These communities critically depend upon market access and obviously upon a softwood lumber agreement. As the Liberal government has not yet named a lead British Columbia minister, I'm hopeful that the importance of a softwood lumber agreement to many BC communities like my own, in my riding and elsewhere, are not overlooked.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. The honourable member for Fundy Royal.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today as the first female member from Fundy Royal in its history and the second Liberal member since Confederation.
Hear, hear.
Testament that real change is afoot in Canada. Mr. Speaker, I'm truly honoured to represent the hardworking people of Fundy Royal, and I thank them for the trust they have placed in me. I would like to take this opportunity to thank one of those hardworking New Brunswickers. His commitment to government, his vision, and his wise counsel guided me to my journey to take my seat here in the House of Commons. Please allow me this opportunity to recognize Mr. Rolly McIntyre. Mr. McIntyre is a former longtime member of the New Brunswick Legislative Assembly and a former cabinet minister. The sentiments he expressed in his last speech in the legislature are sentiments I wish to begin my career with here in this House. Mr. McIntyre said, "We should treat each other with respect and we should leave here as friends." Mr. Speaker, I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the House in this 42nd Parliament to strengthen our communities and to strengthen our country.
The honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come from Coast Salish territory, sent here by the voters of Nanaimo Ladysmith, its voters, its volunteers, my family and friends. I thank them all. And I thank the voters of all of Canada who sent the great diversity to this Parliament. This Parliament holds great promise. So too, 26 years ago, when 14 women were killed in a Coal Polytechnique massacre, they too held great promise. New Democrats will work across the aisle with the government on its promise to implement a national action plan to fight gender-based violence. And we stand with grassroots Indigenous and women's organizations across the country, and including, especially in my own riding, I think of Nanaimo's Haven Society, who have been doing the hard work this last dark decade of supporting victims of violence in our communities. And New Democrats will work with the government across the aisle to ensure that those organizations have the funding that they need to support the inquiry, the domestic violence action plan that comes before us. New Democrats will stand with all.
The honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, it's an honour to rise in recognition of Dumping Day in Nova Scotia. Dumping Day marks the opening of the lobster fishing season in southern Nova Scotia and takes place on the last Monday of November. The brave captains and crew gather on the wharves at daybreak to dump their traps as they head out to sea in search of the most lucrative and prosperous fishing grounds. The South Shore of Nova Scotia is world-renowned for the quality of its lobster, and this industry is vitally important to the sustainability of many rural communities as well as to the greater provincial economy. Mr. Speaker, it is for this reason that many risk their lives in treacherous seas and unpredictable weather in order to provide for their families. This past dumping day was marked with tragedy, as one fisherman lost his life and 2 others fell overboard before being rescued. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank all of the fishermen of District 33 for all they do to provide for our communities and to wish the fleet and their families a safe and successful lobster season.
The honourable member for Brantford Grant.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday 7-year-old Evan Leversage of St. George, Ontario, lost his battle to cancer. Many have heard about Evan's story and the way it brought together a community and galvanized our nation. Having been told by doctors that Evan's time may be running out, his Aunt Ashley asked neighbours to put up their Christmas lights early so that Evan could take in the joy of Christmas one last time. And the town of St. George responded in an overwhelming way, beyond anyone's expectations. On October the 24th, it was incredible to be part of Christmas in St. George, which brought together over 7,000 people together to support Evan and his family. To his mother, Nicole, his father, Travis, his brothers, Logan and Tyson, and his family, I know that I speak for this House in expressing our deepest condolences for your loss. Evan's obituary reads, "Some say he was an angel, placed here to remind us of the important things in life." May the open arms of our loving God embrace you, Evan, and may you rest in peace.
The honourable member for Laurentine-Labelle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a tremendous honour for me to speak today after working behind the scenes here in the House for a number of years. I want to thank the people who elected me in Laurentine-Labelle for putting their trust in me, as well as in our new government. Laurentine-Labelle is the most beautiful riding in Canada. It is where I was born and grew up. Our 43 communities are spread along 20,000 square kilometres, and I'm here to give them a strong voice in Ottawa.
Great-uncle Leon Krestall, who served 13 years in this place, and my great-great-grandfather Hirsch Wolowski, the founder of Canada's first Yiddish daily. I wish everyone Chanukah Sameach. When a flame is lit, its benefit is not restricted to the one lighting it. It is for everyone. Let us all benefit from the flame this Chanukah in the year 5776. Joyeux Chanukah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. John's East. The honourable member for St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, it is with great sadness that I advise you in the House of Commons that on November 19th, 2015, Newfoundland and Labrador's preeminent singer-songwriter, Ronald Joseph Hines, died at the age of 64 following a second bout of throat cancer. Ron Hines' body of work, from Sonny's Dream to the St. John's Waltz to Godspeed, captured the spirit of our people and inspired a generation of musicians, artists, and actors. Since his passing, he has been publicly and spontaneously feted in parks and pubs throughout the province, and he continues to be celebrated. His work was fostered through performing arts grants, his work on CBC and other public arts funding. Our lives are richer for it and for him. While his life was not a model for governance, it is a lesson for all parliamentarians that the heart of a just society is the freedom to live, love, succeed, fail, and be redeemed. Godspeed, Ron Hines. May you pass into the source of all that is good.
The member for Calgary Confederation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is with heavy heart that I stand up today to give tribute to a friend and a past colleague, Mr. Manmeet Singh Bhular, who was a member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta for Calgary Greenway. Manmeet was struck and killed by a vehicle 2 weeks ago after stopping to help a motorist during a storm on an icy section of the QE2, the Queen Elizabeth II Highway, just north of Red Deer. Manmeet was the youngest MLA ever elected to the Alberta Legislature. He was well known for his humanitarian work at home and abroad, most recently advocating tirelessly on behalf of the Sikh and Hindu Afghan refugees. I had the honor of working with Manmeet in the Alberta Legislature for many years. We both served at one time as cabinet ministers and worked closely on numerous issues related to our portfolios. Today I want to extend my sincerest condolences to Manmeet's wife, Namrita, and the Bhular family, as well as his legislative colleagues who now serve in this chamber. Some who now serve in this chamber. Rest in peace, Manmeet.
The
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for People with Disabilities. I rise today to highlight the UN International Day of Persons with Disabilities on December 3rd. The theme this year is Inclusion, Issues, Access and Autonomy for Disabilities.
Quattro, Minister for Sport and Person with Disabilities. Legally blind since birth, my honourable colleague is Canada's first ever minister dedicated specifically to Canadians living with disabilities.
Canada is proud to have been one of the first countries to sign the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and will continue to ensure that it is complied with. We are eager to work with our colleagues here in the House and across the country to develop our efforts. In the coming months, we will contact the provinces, territories, municipalities, and stakeholders to develop legislation to help people with disabilities in this country. We need to concretely help those who need this help.
C'est un nouveau Parlement.
This is a new parliament and a time of excitement, but something that new members need to learn is that we do not mention the name of other members or of ministers. So now we go to the member for York Centre.
This night at sundown marked the first night of Hanukkah. In communities across Canada and around the world, Jewish families will gather to light the menorah and celebrate the Festival of Lights with their loved ones. The Hanukkah story is one of perseverance and great resilience, a story of hope and triumph against oppression. When we light the menorah, the candles help us remember the universal desire for the right to celebrate and express our own beliefs. This celebration of triumph over adversity gives all Canadians an opportunity to reflect on the great contributions of our country's vibrant Jewish community. This serves as a reminder that our country has been made strong not in spite of our differences, but because of them. With the Festival of Lights upon us, I, on behalf of my riding of York Centre, would like to wish all members of this House and all Canadians a season of health and happiness. Happy Hanukkah, Chag Hanukkah Sameach.
Honourable member for Beauport, Côte de Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to highlight the immense courage of Gaston, whose children were killed by their father, Gilles Turcotte. She put her own life aside to fight for the memory of her children and for justice. It is incomprehensible that the first court ruling did not find Guy Turcotte legally responsible, and she worked very hard to make sure that these victims were given justice. She shared with us what a mother feels when part of her life is taken away so violently. She denounced violence against innocent victims, and today justice was on her side. She said that she is relieved by the sentence that was handed down yesterday, and I think all Quebecers were. I hope that she will now find some peace and calm. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable député de Moncton.
Honourable member for Moncton, Dieppe.
The National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, and I had the honour of attending a candlelight vigil organised by the December 6th Committee of Moncton and the District Labour Council, which was held in Moncton, Riverview and Dieppe. As we remember the 14 women who lost their lives in the attack at École Polytechnique in Montreal on December 6, 1989, we also have to reflect on all of the women and girls who have experienced violence. Parmi elles figurent les 12.
Among them are the 1,200 women of Aboriginal background who are missing or have been murdered. We have a duty to act.
Everyone can do something to help to end violence against women and girls.
Today, we would remind Canadians that everyone has a responsibility to help put an end to violence against women.
Safer for all. Thank you.
The honourable member for Hochelaga. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to thank the voters of Hochelaga who have elected me for a second term, and I will continue my work to make their voices heard in Ottawa and to fight for issues of importance to them. Today is the day after the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, and we have a duty to remember the events of December 6, 1989 at the Polytechnique in Montreal, where 14 women were killed because they were women. But also, as parliamentarians, we have a duty to act to make sure that this type of thing never happens again. Every day, women, too many women, are victims of physical and sexual violence, and Aboriginal women are too often the victims. Liberals are going to act on this issue, and it seems to me this is a good time to set a timetable to create an inquiry on missing and murdered Aboriginal women.
The honourable member for Richmond, Arthabaska.
Mr. Speaker, when I was elected, and in speaking to the Speaker of the Throne, I thanked the voters who elected me, but today I want to talk about something more serious, that is the threat of the so-called Islamic State, which is very serious. And last night, the President of the United States spoke to Americans about it. He said that the unfortunate incident in San Bernardino in California was an act of terrorism, and he told Americans he was going to destroy the Islamic State. But Canada does not seem to be giving the impression that we are going to act. The Prime Minister does not recognize the seriousness of the situation. And I was shocked to see that the President of the United States, who, when he talked about the international coalition, did not mention Canada at all. Is this a coincidence that the government has announced that we are withdrawing our combat planes And I believe that Canadians want a government that will demonstrate leadership in fighting the Islamic State. The Honourable Member for Bruxelles-Saint-Lambert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am sorry today to have to stand in the House to recall the horror that we all felt on December 6, 1989. The tragic events at the Polytechnique School represent heartache for the 14 families who have to continually deal with this loss.
As real today as they were 26 years ago. Violence against women is tenacious, it's borderless, and it's more often than not endemic. We'll have only to remember the missing and murdered Indigenous women to realize that violence against us is still so often the norm.
The statistics show that it is not only vulnerable women who are victims of violence. Women from every social class, from all backgrounds, and of every age suffer violence and intolerance just because they are women. Mr. Speaker, I would urge all of us to take a moment to remember all victims, those of the Polytechnique tragedy and those who suffer every day. And especially a thought for the memory of Nathalie Croteau, who lived in Brossard when she was killed in 1989.
Oral questions, questions orales. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, last night, President Obama stated that airstrikes are a key pillar in the fight against ISIS. In the last week, we've seen the Obama administration, Germany, France, and the UK step up their efforts and their airstrikes. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has ordered our CF-18s to stand down. Why is the Prime Minister stepping back from the fight when our allies are stepping up?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada has spoken clearly in this past election. They want Canadians and our military to continue to engage in the fight against ISIS, and we are committed to continuing to do that. However, we have also made a clear commitment to withdraw the 6 CF-18 fighter jets and engage in a continued way militarily, in humanitarian efforts and in refugee efforts, which we are continuing to do. I engage with our allies on these issues, and they've reassured me that we are continuing to be helpful. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Let's just be clear about what ISIS is. They are a death cult that sell children and women into sexual slavery. They target and kill gays and lesbians, and they have murdered thousands of Muslims, Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities. Yet the Prime Minister says he's going to take our CF-18s out of the fight. Just how bad does it have to be in Iraq and Syria for him to leave our CF-18s there?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there isn't a Canadian in this country who doesn't think that ISIS are a group of terrible terrorists who should be stopped. The question has always been how best to engage. How can Canada use its strengths, the extraordinary strengths of the men and women of the Canadian forces, to support in the fight against ISIS? Now, ongoing right now continue to be airstrikes. We have committed to end those airstrikes and to transform our engagement in a different way, equally militarily, to ensure that Canada continues to be a strong member of the coalition fighting against ISIS.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, last night President Obama also said that his closest allies have stepped up their airstrikes. And then he went on to name France and Germany and the UK. But no mention of Canada. Mr. Speaker, stepping back from the fight against terrorists is not stepping up. So will the Prime Minister just admit that he's more committed to his ideology than he is to our allies in the fight against ISIS?
Honourable the Prime Minister.
Just a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, I sat down with President Obama and discussed and confirmed that Canada continues to be a strong supporter of the coalition against ISIL and continues to be engaged on a humanitarian level, on a refugee level, and indeed on a military level. And right now we are in discussions with our allies about how best Canada can continue to participate and to help in the fight against ISIL since we are withdrawing our CF-18 aircraft.
No, member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, last night, President Obama had some harsh words for ISIL. He said the threat of terrorism is real, but we will beat it. We will destroy ISIL and any other organization that wants to do us harm. Can the Prime Minister assure us that he shares President Obama's views? The Honourable Prime Minister. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, Canada and myself and the Liberal Party and the Government of Canada will continue resolutely in our desire and conviction to continue to combat ISIL together with our international partners. But what we won't do is keep talking about it and giving free publicity to ISIL because they use propaganda to spread. The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Of course, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has referred to his meeting with Obama. It's very strange that just a few days later, when talking about his trusted allies, he talked about France, the UK, and Germany. We don't want slogans like Canada's back. How is the Prime Minister going to defend Canadians against ISIL? Right, Honourable Prime Minister. As I've always said, Mr. Speaker, Canada is determined to combat ISIL. We will continue to remain committed and involved militarily, but we will withdraw our jet fighters because we've been talking about it for months with Canadians, and Canadians trust us to continue to take strong action against ISIL in a way that's appropriate for Canada. Thank you. The honourable member for Outremont. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to begin by congratulating the Prime Minister and by ensuring him that the NDP will be an opposition that will seek to help the government fulfill its promises to Canadians. But a lot of Canadians are disappointed that the Prime Minister brought along in his suitcase to Paris the plan and the targets of the previous Conservative government around greenhouse gases. Can the Prime Minister commit here today, in 2016, greenhouse gas emissions in Canada will go down? Yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to congratulate my colleague on his election. The fact is, we brought a new plan to Paris. During the election campaign, we made commitments to the tune of tens of billions of dollars in green infrastructure, green and clean energies. We have a whole plan to achieve what the previous government failed to do, and that is reduce GHGs. The honourable member for Outremont. So no plan to reduce GHGs next year.
Change in tone on climate change, but they're also hoping that the change of tone will bring about a concrete change of direction. Once it finally decides on Canada's targets, will this government make them binding by enshrining them into a climate change accountability law here at home?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
One of the things that my honourable colleague seems to forget from time to time is Canada is a federation with 10 provinces that all have different approaches and different requirements. And we have committed to sit down and engage with those provinces, listen to them, and work out not just targets but a plan that is going to ensure that Canada meets its international and domestic obligations to reduce climate emissions and develop a strong economy.
The honourable member for Outremont.
Thought he just said he had a plan. During the campaign, the Liberal leader said he would, quote, restore robust oversight and thorough environmental assessments. But last week, the Environment Minister said that projects initiated under the Conservative system will, quote, continue on that path. Can the Prime Minister reveal whether pipelines, for example, now under review, will undergo a thorough assessment that includes greenhouse gas impacts? Or will they simply continue to use the woefully inadequate assessment system left by the Conservatives?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It's very clear, Mr. Speaker, that Canadians know that we need both a strong environment and a protected, strong economy and a strong environment at the same time. That's why Canadians want a system environmental assessment that they can trust. We will launch a public review and we will make the changes needed to restore public confidence in the environmental assessment of natural resource projects. We will modernize the National Energy Board to ensure that its composition reflects regional views and has sufficient expertise in environmental science, community development, and Indigenous traditional knowledge.
The honourable member for Outremont. So the pipeline projects will continue under the old Conservative system. During the election campaign, the Prime Minister said, with reference to Canada Post, and I quote, "We are committed to restoring door-to-door delivery," unquote. And yet, there was nothing in the throne speech, and his Minister of Public Services said last week that the service would not be restored. So who's telling the truth? Will the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Prime Minister? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fact is, we clearly committed to providing Canadians with the services they expect from Canada Post. We will work with Canada Post. We've imposed a moratorium on the installation of community mailboxes, and we'll keep working with the ministers and our partners to ensure that Canadians get the services they need.
The honourable member for Milton.
First of all, Mr. Speaker, by welcoming the honourable member, the Minister of Finance, to the House. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of fun in the coming weeks. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister made two fundamental commitments to Canadians. One, that the deficit wouldn't go above $10 billion per year, and two, that any tax increases would actually be revenue neutral. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, neither of these are true, and it seems as if we're leaving these commitments in the dust. So my question for the Minister of Finance is, how much will these broken promises cost Canadians?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question. It's a pleasure to be here and a privilege. We made commitments to Canadians during the course of our campaign. We recognize that the economy is slowing. It's slower than we expected. We are going to make significant investments in our economy through infrastructure investments. We are going to make sure that we reduce our net debt to GDP over the course of our mandate, and we intend on getting to a balanced budget during the term of our mandate. We look forward to serving Canadians in this way. Thank you.
The honourable member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, we are going to hold the Minister to his promise to Canadians of balancing budget by 2013. But one way of balancing that budget, Mr. Speaker, is by increasing taxes. And indeed, this government already says they're going to increase taxes. But guess what? It's not going to pay for what is happening on the other end of the balance. There's no revenue neutrality here. So my question for the minister is this: will now he admit, now that he's going to admit later on today supposedly, that indeed that this isn't going to work for him, will he admit that increased payroll taxes, that increased taxes on retirement savings, and the complex re-engineering of how children receive their support is not going to work either and is also flawed?
The Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, again, I'd like to thank the honourable member and say I think that this will be fun. I will say that we're starting today with a very important part of our plan. We are starting today with middle-class tax breaks, a key part of our initiative to help communities.
Honourable member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, one thing is for sure, this government is very good at giving out money, but are they good at growing the economy? Mr. Speaker, oil today is at $38 a barrel. We are understanding that 185,000 job losses in the oil and gas sector in 2006 are possible. This affects everybody who works in that sector, including those in Alberta. Albertans are hurting, Mr. Speaker, yet this sector was not mentioned even once in the speech from the throne. Why is Canada's economic engine not a priority for this government?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have inherited a situation that is more challenging than was foreseen in the budget. We are looking forward to making significant investments in our economy to help the growth of the economy because we recognize the challenges that Canadians are facing across this country. We look forward to doing a better job for Canadians in the years to come.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. During the election campaign, the Prime Minister made two major commitments. First, to run a deficit of $10 billion and to bring in tax cuts that would benefit everyone. But today, Canadians wake up and they realize that's not true. It's unrealistic. Can the Prime Minister stand up and tell Canadians directly how much these broken promises are going to cost them?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we aspire to be transparent and open with Canadians. Our goal is to give Canadians a clear understanding of the fiscal situation from which we can make investments that will make a real long-term difference for Canadians, and that's exactly what we intend on doing by bringing forward our plan over the course of our budget that will show Canadians how we can improve our collective future.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, the throne speech left out entrepreneurs. Not a single word or concrete plan to help entrepreneurs and small business and small manufacturing businesses. On this side of the House, we think the real wealth creators are our entrepreneurs. Why has this government left them out? Why have they done nothing to help Canadian entrepreneurs and wealth creators? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the honourable member.
That we need to deal with all Canadians. Our goal is to help entrepreneurs, to help businesses across the country by setting forward a plan that will allow us to invest in our country so that we can make our country more productive and increase growth going forward while helping those that are struggling to get by, which is exactly what we're starting with today.
The honourable member for Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, Liberals are already increasing payroll taxes, clawing back tax-free savings accounts, and implementing a job-killing carbon tax. They're also planning to get rid of boutique tax credits without any details of who will be affected. Can the Finance Minister tell us whether he plans to eliminate tax credits for first-time homebuyers, students, apprentices, families with children in the sports and arts, or all of the above?
Great question. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we can tell the House today is that we are starting our program to help Canadians. Today is a day where we have said we are going to reduce middle-class taxes by asking those Canadians who are doing very well to pay a little bit more. This is an important first start in our tax program, a program that will make Canada a fairer place for Canadians and a better place for all of us to do business.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Les-Basques.
Merci.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government is now admitting their tax plan doesn't add up. They will have to make changes. The new government's plan gives maximum benefit to wealthy Canadians while giving nothing to nearly 70%. The NDP has proposed constructive change to ensure benefits go to 90% of Canadians. Will the minister work with us to help millions more by fixing the government's plan and making the tax system more fair?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I want to first thank the Honourable Deputy for his question and say congratulations on his election. I will say that our plan, when looked at in totality over the coming months, will show that 9 out of 10 Canadian families will be better off through the course of our mandate, through our projections, because of our changes. We will also raise 315,000 Canadian children out of poverty. So our plan will start by reducing taxes and move forward to help Canadians across this country from coast to coast to coast.
The honourable member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Les-Basques. Mr. Speaker, under the Liberal tax plan, the median income earner gets nothing, but those earning between $90,000 and $200,000 get the maximum tax break. Does the minister think that a median income earner is not part of the middle class, or will he work with the NDP to cover 90% of Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we are looking forward to working together with all of our colleagues in this House in trying to come up with policy that best helps Canadians move forward. Our plans that we've enumerated during our campaign will help 9 out of 10 families to be better off. It will raise 315,000 children out of poverty. We know that we can start with a tax cut for Canadians in the middle class so they will have more money to help our economy, and we can move forward with other initiatives that will help other Canadians even more.
Honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Liberals have admitted that their campaign promise to bring 25,000 Syrian refugees to Canada by year's end was not within their ability to achieve. The government of Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan require exit permits to be issued to refugees before they can come to Canada. Given that there are only 24 days left for the Liberals to meet their diminished refugee target, can the Minister of Immigration tell the House exactly how many exit permits have actually been issued to by these governments for refugees coming to Canada since November the 4th?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate my colleague for her re-election and her rise to the noble post of immigration critic in the opposition. And I would simply say that we have pursued a totally open communication policy with Canadians from the beginning. From the beginning, we have said that, yes, there are issues surrounding exit permits from Lebanon. We have also dealing with Jordan and with Turkey, and we are working extremely hard on the ground to secure those exit permits so we can...
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given my colleagues' focus on talking about rising to the occasion, I would say that sunny ways have actually met reality here. So, Mr. Speaker, given that there are only 24 days left before the end of the year, can the Minister of Immigration please inform the House, since he wasn't able to answer that question on exit permits, how many Syrian refugees have been identified for resettlement to Canada, the exact number, and how many Canadian permanent residence visas have actually been issued to Syrian refugees since November the 4th? There's only 24 days left, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to answer that question, because when I asked every provincial immigration minister how many immigrants refugees from Syria his province could receive. Do you know what? We were oversubscribed. If you take all the numbers presented by every provincial minister, that number exceeds 25,000. Those people are not here yet, but it's a huge indication of early support and enthusiasm from our provincial governments, which spreads across the whole country, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Markham Unionville.
Mr. Speaker, even the Liberals' diminished refugee target will require significant resources to achieve. We still need to process applications in other immigration streams, including refugee claims from other parts of the world, spousal applications, and visitors' visas. Can the Minister explain how diverting human resources to process Syrian refugee applications will impact other areas of our immigration system?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I asked my department this question, and I was a little bit skeptical when I was told it would have no impact on refugees from other countries. But I persisted, and they explained to me that while some resources are being diverted to the Syrian cause, no resources are being diverted for other refugees. So I can say very clearly, other refugees will not be affected by the Syrian case.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is vital that our government provide assistance to Syrian refugees, but security on the ground is key to provide aid to those vulnerable people. Mr. Speaker, our Conservative government understood this importance of both engaging ISIL militarily and providing aid. But the new government has decided to sit on the sidelines on one flank, making it even more dangerous for the people still in the camps. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of International Development explain the logic of helping the victims of war while not engaging the aggressor?
Honourable Minister of International Development.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, last week we announced that we would increase funding by $100 million to help with humanitarian needs in the field, to help UNHCR support and accommodate a larger number of refugees, and $90 million to help people in the camps, refugees who are currently in neighboring countries.
La députée de Abitibi.
The honourable member of Abitibi, Bay James, Nunavik, EU. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the throne speech, the government reiterated its willingness to establish a nation-to-nation relationship with Aboriginal peoples. Mr. Speaker, we salute that commitment and offer our full cooperation. After decades of broken promises, this time, Mr. Speaker, must be the right one. But we're still waiting for the details with respect to the $2.6 billion promised during the campaign for First Nations education. Can the minister tell us when the government will make these intentions known?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Affairs and Northern Development.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member from Abitibi, James Bay EU, and I thank him for all of the work that he has done on this issue, and particularly on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. You have taught us a lot, member, and so he has. I look forward. This government has committed to a nation-to-nation relationship, and we will begin that very important work of reconciliation, and we will need the help of all members in the House.
Honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I'm heartened by the minister's language on reconciliation, but she does know, as we do, that reconciliation has to begin on the ground in communities like Shoal Lake, Martin Falls, and Neskantanga, where children are facing bacterial infections from dirty water. And we all have a responsibility to change that. So the Prime Minister has committed 5 years to ending the boiled water advisory. So I'm asking the Minister, could she tell us what her timeline is for an action plan, and will that action plan have clear guidelines and commitments so we can get results for these communities?
Honourable Minister of Indigenous Affairs.
From Timmins, James Bay, for all of his hard work, and not only in his community, but for First Nations coast to coast to coast. As our government has committed to a nation-to-nation approach, it means that we will have to work with First Nations, Inuit and Métis Nation for us to be able to achieve this goal, and I look forward to working with the member to make sure that happens, and then we will have realistic timelines and goals and the budget assigned.
Bravo.
L'honorable député d'Ottawa-Vanier.
The honourable member for Ottawa-Vanier. Mr. Speaker, during the 41st Parliament, I had many questions. With respect to Burundi, I'm very proud of our government and the fact that last week it took steps. Can the Minister of Public Safety tell us what Canada plans to do to stabilize Burundi?
Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I am delighted to have my first question in this portfolio from that distinguished member. When people need to be removed from Canada according to the law, one of the factors taken into consideration is whether that can be done safely. The most recent information available to us on the country of Burundi indicates that removals cannot be done safely at the present time. Consequently, the Government of Canada immediately has announced that the Canada Border Services Agency has imposed an administrative deferral on all removals from Canada to Burundi.
The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, in the speech from the throne, the Liberal government told Canadians they want a leaner military. And we all know leaner is just a code word for cuts. Last spring, the Parliamentary Budget Officer acknowledged in his report on national defence spending, and I quote, "The most significant cuts occurred from 1995 to 2004. Mr. Speaker, that was under the previous Liberal government. Are we going back to the future? Can the Minister of Defence tell us what he's going to be cutting?
The Honourable Minister of Defence.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I just want to say it's a privilege and an honor to be standing for the first time in this honourable House. Our government is committed to the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces. We will be making sure that the planned increases remain in place and making sure that when we send our men and women to the important missions around the world, that they are actually have the capabilities to achieve that mission. Thank you.
The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the throne speech was 1,700 words, and not one of those words was ISIS. In the past few days, we have watched with leaders of France, the United Kingdom, and the United States announce that they're stepping up in the fight against ISIS. Back here, the Liberal government is stepping back. Canada's back, all right, way back behind our allies in the fight against ISIS. Why won't the Prime Minister stand shoulder to shoulder with her allies in the fight against ISIS?
Madame la ministre des Affaires globales.
The Honourable Minister.
The honourable member expressed the view of his party, and our view is that we will be more optimally effective with our allies to fight this awful terrorist group if we stop to deliver only 2% of the airstrikes and if we focus on where Canada will make a real difference.
L'honorable député de Charlebourg.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I was a Lieutenant Colonel in the Canadian Forces. I underwent those cuts, and in the throne speech last week, the Liberal government said that it would be streamlining our current forces capabilities. Can the minister tell us, instead of talking about seeking out efficiencies, what divisions of the Canadian Armed Forces will be faced with budget cuts, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Defence.
Mr. Speaker, this government is committing to making sure that the Canadian Armed Forces has the right capabilities. We want to make sure that every department needs to strive for efficiency, and our government plans to do so, to making sure that we have the right resources at the pointy end where our men and women need it the most. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, it's worrisome to think that instead of supporting our allies in the fight of terrorists here and abroad, our country will simply be staying on the sidelines and offering training. Will the Minister of Defence tell us why Canada is not being a leader in this fight against terrorism?
Minister of Global Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, Canada will do its share to fight terrorism effectively by focusing on training, the training of military forces, of police forces, help for governance, and these will create conditions Iraqis can have strength in, and we will be doing this very courageously, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, 26 years after 14 women were murdered simply for being women, for daring to study engineering, violence against women remains unacceptably high. Working together, we in the NDP believe we can work together to end violence against women. But federal leadership is required. The new government promised a strategy on gender violence, including an immediate inquiry into the terrible issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. Can the minister please tell us when her government plans to call this important inquiry?
Monsieur le Ministre. For the Minister for the Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the member's excellent question. We are very excited to move forward on this file. Murdered and missing Indigenous women is a national tragedy that not only affects women, but their families and their communities. And so we intend to move forward incredibly quickly and with great deal of respect. We will do this by ensuring that we work with families and communities and national stakeholders to make sure we get it right the first time. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Mr. Speaker, 26 years after the École Polytechnique tragedy, too many women are still victims of violence because they are women. According to the Quebec Women's Shelters Federation, 10,000 women were turned away last year alone. When I worked in a shelter, I too had to turn women away. Women who are victims of violence must have access to this essential service. Can the minister tell us when her government will invest in shelters?
The Minister for the Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the excellent question. As the former executive director of a homeless shelter in Thunder Bay, I can tell you there's nothing more heartbreaking than being able to provide women a safe shelter. So it's my incredible honor to be able to work on this file and ensure that when women need a safe place to stay, barriers will be eliminated, and more than that, that we move forward to transitional housing that will eliminate the need for the cycle of sheltering. Thank you very much.
Honourable Member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The newly minted Minister of Trade continues to confuse Canadians with statements like, it's not her job to promote trade, and of course she's not ratifying TPP until the Americans do. This deal has been years in discussion, is now the gold standard on environmental and labour chapters. She claims to be pro-trade, so when will she stop stalling and sign this deal?
Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. Our government supports free trade so strongly, I couldn't wait to answer that question. We understand how important it is for middle-class prosperity. We also understand on a deal this big, it is essential to consult Canadians and have a full parliamentary debate. But I must say to my honourable colleague that he is a little bit mistaken on the facts when he suggests we could be signing the deal now. The deal is not open at the moment yet for either signature or ratification, and he might want to have a coffee with the honourable member from Abbotsford, who is well versed in the details of how trade deals work.
The honourable member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, the government is closing its eyes to the problems facing farmers. In the throne speech, there was no mention of it. Not a word on agriculture. The Liberals banned the word agriculture, agri-food, farmers from their dictionary. They wiped out those words. Mr. Speaker, our producers under supply management want to know if the agreement on compensation under the TPP will be respected. Can the Minister of International Trade, can she clarify her position with respect to this compensation?
Minister of International Trade.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government supports free trade, and we understand the importance of international trade for the economic growth of the country and for middle-class prosperity. As regards the TPP, we will be transparent, fully transparent, and hold a full debate in Parliament. Finally, we will defend the interests of all farmers, and there I've said it, Canadian farmers, with our my colleague, the Minister of Agriculture. I've already met with farmers on this subject. This is the commitment we made, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Grant Perry Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the World Trade Organization ruled that the United States country of origin labeling was in fact blatantly protectionist. This is a rule that has cost our farm families over $3 billion on an annual basis. Now, our government was prepared to move expeditiously as soon as this ruling came out. Now, I wonder, you know, the invisible Minister of Agriculture has been invisible on this and other files. I'm wondering if he'll stand in this place, finally do his job, and defend the interests of farm families.
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the discriminatory coal legislation was in place for 8 years during the previous government's rule, and they did not. I welcome the ruling by the WTO, the fourth time the WTO has ruled in our favor with a record $1 billion quantum. We are pursuing this matter. I welcome the fact that the House of Representatives has repealed coal. We're calling on the Senate to do the same. Senator Pat Roberts has already today, Chairman of the Agriculture Committee, called for repeal of coal. And I would like to say to the honourable member who...
Honourable Member for Vancouver Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this
morning, the WTO sided with Canada for the third time on the matter of discriminatory U.S. coal legislation. The WTO arbitrator has found that the nullification and impairment under coal cost Canada about $1 billion a year and cost Mexico about $228 US annually. Now, will the minister tell us how this ruling will affect Canada's pork and beef products?
Bravo, bravo.
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
I thank the honourable member for Vancouver Centre for her question, and I am delighted to be back in the House with my cherished colleague. We welcome the WTO ruling. This is a vindication of the Canadian position. We are working very hard in Washington with the Senate, and we are very pleased Congress has already repealed this. And I do want to say to Canada's beef and pork producers, the Minister of Agriculture is a former farmer. I'm a daughter and granddaughter of ranchers. We are on the side of Canada's producers. We're in your corner, and if we have to retaliate, we will.
Yeah. The Honourable Member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, this new government was not given a blank check, and Canadians expect due diligence. On June 2nd, when the Truth and Reconciliation report was released, the current Prime Minister pledged his unwavering support for all 94 recommendations, the full list, no exceptions. Can the Minister of Indigenous Affairs give us the full cost of keeping this promise?
Honourable Minister of Indigenous Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou for her question and for the work that we will get to do together on this really important file. We are so pleased to see that already that the provinces and territories have taken up those calls to action that are theirs, that the universities in this country have already committed to help with the things that are theirs, and that we will be able to do this. It was inappropriate for us to cherry pick out of the 94 recommendations, and with political will and leadership and partnership, nation to nation, we're going to get this done.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the election campaign, people told us that they wanted to keep their home mail delivery service. In my region, 50,000 families lost their home mail delivery, including 20,000 in Jonquière. Now, the minister is going back on her solemn commitment, but can she commit at least that there will be no further community mailboxes installed across the country?
Honourable Member, Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for her question. Yes, we certainly can commit that there will not be any more roadside mailboxes installed. We put a stop to that, which meant that anyone who did have roadside mailboxes would get their door-to-door mail delivery resumed. So we are at a position, Mr. Speaker, where we have committed to home delivery. We are going to have a complete review of Canada Post, and they will determine the next steps.
The Honourable Member for Yukon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This place, and again represent the people of the Yukon. Over the past several months, Canadians have made it clear that they not only want a new tone in leadership in Ottawa, but they also want a more accountable government. During the election, the Prime Minister made a commitment to implement a Prime Minister's question period. I now ask, Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister could please update this place on the status of this important promise.
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians voted for change, and we're committed to delivering that change. We're committed to open, honest, transparent government. I have asked the Government House Leader to work with other parliamentarians to reform question period so that all ministers, including the Prime Minister, can be held to greater account. I know that the House Leader has already initiated discussions with other parliamentarians in the opposition, and I look forward to participating in Prime Minister's question period sometime in the future.
The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the past 15 years, 3 provinces have held referenda on electoral reform. In all 3, voters rejected the proposals. So it seems a bit undemocratic or even anti-democratic for the government to assert in the throne speech that 2015 will be the last federal election conducted under the first-past-the-post voting system. Wouldn't it make more sense for the government, once it has designed a new system, to follow the example of British Columbia, Ontario, and Prince Edward Island and allow Canadians to vote directly for or against the proposed new electoral system?
The Honourable Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. In this election, Canadians were clear that they are expecting us to deliver a change. This will be the last first-past-the-post federal election in our history, and we've committed to listening to Canadians, not just in British Columbia, but coast to coast to coast, and including them in a process and in the conversation that will change the history of this nation's democracy.
The honourable member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Prime Minister. In last week's throne speech, we saw that the government would undertake work with the provinces to put in place a new healthcare agreement. During the election, the Prime Minister sent a letter to his Quebec counterpart referring back to the 2004 healthcare agreement where Quebec had the right to opt out with full compensation. Will the Prime Minister respond to Quebec's request and establish at 6% the increase in health transfers while respecting Quebec's right to opt out with full compensation?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to speak about the Canadian healthcare system, which has provided healthcare to Canadians now for well over half of a century in offering universal, publicly insured healthcare. It's something that Canadians hold dear. On the matter of the Canada Health Act, we sincerely uphold the Canada Health Act and its principles, including universality. I have already had the wonderful opportunity to be able to speak with my provincial and territorial counterparts, and we will be meeting together in January to discuss a new health accord, which will provide ongoing health care for Canadians in years to come.
The honourable member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. The Quebec National Assembly adopted legislation that would make it possible to include medically assisted dying as part of the continuum of palliative care, in accordance with the strict will of a person who is in the terminal phase of life. The Prime Minister even lauded Quebec's legislation. Can the Minister of Health guarantee that the 6-month extension requested by the federal government will not be detrimental to the coming into force of Quebec's legislation?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend for the question. The topic of physician-assisted dying is highly complex, sensitive, and we need to ensure that we have a discussion, a real discussion with Canadians that focuses on health care, that focuses on personal choice, and ensures that we protect the vulnerable. We are committed to ensuring and working with parliamentarians and asking this House to strike an all-party committee to examine this issue and proceed in a concerted way.
The honourable member for Manicouagan.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister plans to go ahead with a new Canada Child benefit, and we'll see the details of that measure in the next budget. In the meantime, parents are still being ripped off because of taxes on the enhanced universal child care benefit that came into force in the summer and the abolishing of the child tax credit. Will the Prime Minister commit to making the UCCB tax-free for 2015, even if he intends to put in place a new benefit in the next budget?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by thanking the honourable member for her question. We intend on bringing forward a new Canada Child benefit in the course of our budget 2016. We believe that this is the appropriate way to get at this issue, and will do so expeditiously in order to ensure that Canadian families can do better as they pursue their options for how they want to raise their children.
This will be the end of question period for today. Routine proceedings. Tabling of documents.
It's not easy, but...
Order, allowed. Order. I encourage members to take their discussions outside, into the lobbies. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 83-1, I wish to table a notice of Ways and Means motion to amend the Income Tax Act. Pursuant to Standing Order 83-2, I ask that an order of the day be designated for consideration of the motion. And, Mr. Speaker, while I'm on my feet, I'd like to table, pursuant to Standing Order 32-2, a document in both official languages entitled Update of Fiscal and Economic Projections 2015 that was released on November 20th, 2015. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank the Minister. And I encourage members, when question period is finished, to leave the chamber, or if they're going to want